Hey guys, Neely here. I'm coming in for a video today that I talked about yesterday on my Wellness Wednesday update. I wanted to talk about trigger foods versus buffer foods, and this is something that I have learned from the metabolic effect people, including Jade Teta. He writes about it on his blog as well as in his book, Lose Weight Here. And it is a great tool to know about, to learn your own body and what kind of foods work well for you and benefit you, and other foods that can cause you trouble. And the unique thing about this concept is a lot of diet books and people out there will talk about bad foods and good foods and kind of just make it really black and white. These are foods that are bad for everybody. These are foods that are good for everybody. But what I love about metabolic effect is that they really recognize that we are all different, and there's a lot of biochemistry differences between all of us, and what works for some people doesn't always work for other people. So they really give you the tools to just know your body really well and to be able to make those decisions. And this is one of those really great tools. So first off, the trigger foods. I'll just read real quick in the book here what he says about trigger foods. A trigger food is one that causes undesirable effects after eating it and or silently keeps you from achieving the diet and weight loss results you're after. In other words, it triggers a negative change in your HEC, that's hunger, energy, and cravings, throwing it out of check and causing you to eat the wrong things. Trigger foods can also be foods that silently keep you from getting results due to hormonal changes, hidden sources of calories, or undesirable effects on the immune system. And then he gives examples of common trigger foods like artificial sweeteners, dairy and gluten. Definitely dairy is one for me. Nuts, nut butters, and alcohol. The combination of fat, starch, and sugar is a big one. I know I have experienced this. It's very common when you eat something that's fatty, sugary, and salty at the same time. You just want to keep eating it. And also he mentions a limited variety in your diet that can be a trigger and make you want to eat more later on. So those are some common trigger foods for people, but of course you have to look at yourself and kind of observe and see what trigger foods are for you. It could be a huge variety of things. And then now I'm going to talk about buffer foods, then talk about how buffer foods and trigger foods kind of can relate to each other. I'll just read a real quick paragraph here. If you're struggling to stay on track during the week, then the buffer foods, unlike the trigger foods, may work for you, not against you. Used periodically during the week, buffer foods have the ability to balance your metabolism. They vary more broadly compared to trigger foods and could be something that is merely psychologically pleasing. For example, if you have 2 small squares of dark chocolate in the afternoon when you're craving candy, you might not go to the candy machine at work for an entire bag of M&Ms, or you might avoid ordering a large pizza later that night. Simply put, buffer foods can keep you sane. They buffer the negative impact of fluctuations in hunger, energy, and cravings, making them a great tool for you to manage this lifestyle and ultimately body change. So it's really interesting how the buffer food list and the trigger food list can have the same foods on them for different people. So for example, it might be super helpful for me to have a tablespoon of peanut butter with my apple, and that keeps me satisfied, and that is psychologically pleasing, and I get to my next meal and I'm able to continue to make healthy choices. But for another person, that tablespoon of peanut butter might be a trigger food, and as soon as they take a bite of that, they're like diving into the jar and eating the entire thing. So this is where you really have to be a good detective of your own body and just watch yourself and just recognize for yourself what those foods might be. So I love the idea that Metabolic Effect has put out, which is that meals are not eaten in isolation, meaning you can create a meal that looks perfect in and of itself, but if you look at the entire picture and you see that you have that meal and then later on it triggers a binge or eating something else unhealthy, then in hindsight, that meal that looked super healthy wasn't actually healthy at all. There's a few variations of a meme that has gone around on Facebook and Instagram that you probably have seen, where it talks about how I had water and licked an almond for breakfast, and then I had a kale salad for lunch, and then ate like a sleeve of Oreos and a pint of Ben & Jerry's and an entire pizza for dinner. And it's just the joke that you try to eat healthy and eventually you just end up in a binge. That's obviously an extreme example, but when you look at the whole picture, you can see that what looked like a really healthy breakfast and a really healthy lunch was not actually healthy at all, because it triggered you to go and eat the pizza and the ice cream and the Oreos. So I have been thinking a lot about this and kind of observing myself, and I jotted down a few items on each of the lists of trigger foods and buffer foods, and I'll just share them with you guys as an example. As far as trigger foods that once I eat a little bit, I want to eat a lot, I have found that white rice is one where I serve myself out a portion, but I always want to go back for more. Also, a lot of things with sugar, but especially if it's chocolate, a sweet chocolate, like a milk chocolate, I just want to keep eating, keep eating. But it's interesting that dark chocolate is on my buffer foods list, as long as it is like a 85% that's not super sweet. I can eat, 1 or 2 squares and it completely satisfies me, and I do not have the urge to just go eat the entire bar. So it is a food that I can add to my diet, and it actually helps me with my satisfaction and getting to my next meal and continuing to make healthy choices throughout the day. But as soon as I have that super sweet, creamy chocolate, then that's where I get triggered and I want to keep eating. Also, corn chips are one. There have been many times where I'm like, I'm just gonna have one, and it's just way too easy to just keep going, keep going. And also anything that includes warm bread, like bread out of the oven, rolls, warm pretzels, anything that has warm bread involved, that is something that I cannot just eat one bite, or at least it's very difficult. I can do it. I have the choice, but it makes it very difficult. It's definitely a trigger for me. Then buffer foods for me, I just wrote down a few. I don't have a ton, because I feel like with my diet right now, the way it is, my hunger, energy, and cravings are so in control right now that I don't have to do a lot to mess with it to try to keep them in control. But a few things that I do just to keep me satisfied and make me feel good. Like I said, dark chocolate. In the afternoon, I'm craving something and I just need something. A square of dark chocolate does it for me, especially if it's with coffee. And then also cream for my coffee. I always do that. That's just something I really, really enjoy. I only need a tablespoon in a whole mug of coffee, and that's plenty for me. I don't do any sweetener at all, but having the cream just makes it so satisfying for me. And anytime I've gone on a diet where I have to give up the cream in my coffee, it's torture. Not really torture, but it's just, I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And for me, I want to find foods and a lifestyle that I can live with and I can also be satisfied and happy with. So having the cream in my coffee, that's definitely a buffer food for me. There are a lot of arguments that say it's healthier if you just cut it out. It's not a good food necessarily. I mean, there's debate, but it's just one of those things where psychologically it's very healthy for me, and cutting it out is not healthy for me because it's not healthy for my brain and for my whole satisfaction. Then a couple other things that really help me out, Zevia, the stevia sweetened sodas. I get very satisfied if I have one of those. If I have it with a meal or between a meal, I often like to do it if I'm cooking a meal and I'm hungry while I'm cooking and I just need something to get me through until it's time to eat. Just super satisfying, and it just tastes really good. So again, psychologically, it's just satisfying. And then also one that I realized recently that I hadn't thought about before is kombucha, and it's kind of the same as the Zevia, where it just tastes really good. It's sweet and it's satisfying, but I find I only need some tiny little sips. I kind of drink it like people would drink wine, where I get a nice glass and I just drink little sips of it, and I can just have a tiny little amount, but it's super satisfying. And again, if it's like between a meal and I don't want to eat yet, or I'm not able to sit down and have a meal, just having half a cup of kombucha, it really, really helps. I used to make my own kombucha, but I wasn't drinking enough of it to make it worth it. So I stopped, and I have just been buying bottles of it every once in a while. It's not something I get all the time, but I'll get a bottle of it, like the GT's kombucha, gingerberry or something like that. And I will have it in the fridge, and I'll just take a few sips every time I need some. and it lasts for several days. So those are my buffer foods and trigger foods. I hope that was helpful. It's just something to think about. I love the idea of being a detective and figuring out what works for your body and not just necessarily blindly following what someone else says, because usually when they're putting something out like that, they're sharing what works for their body, which is fantastic, and you can learn so much from listening to what works for everybody else. But in the end, you really should be able to focus and see what things trigger you and see what things are a buffer for you to help you get through and continue on your healthy lifestyle. I will put the link down below to the article. There's an article on the Metabolic Effect blog that talks all about buffer foods and trigger foods, and the excerpts that I read from the Lose Weight Here book are almost word for word in that article as well, so you can find it there. And I'll also put a link down to the book as well if you're interested in that. That's it, guys. I hope that was helpful. Let's chat down in the comments if you want to talk more about it, and I will see you again soon. Bye, guys.